episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor.
Welcome everybody to part two of a fascinating episode we started a couple weeks ago with the fascinating Dr. Julia Mossbridge, founder and research director of the Mossbridge Institute, founder and executive director of the Institute for Love and Time, affiliate professor at University of San Diego Department of Physics and Biophysics, fellow at the Institute of Noetic Sciences, and associate professor in integral and transpersonal psychology at the California Institute of Integral Studies. We had a fascinating discussion last time talking about consciousness and the unconscious mind and non-consciousness. We talked a little bit about precognition. We talked a little bit about what time means. We're going to get into a lot of other really deep and exciting topics today. So, Julia Mossbridge, welcome back. I'm looking forward to this.
Hi, I'm really glad to be here. Yeah, me too. I had a blast, and I really like your questions and your patience with my long-winded answers. It's fantastic. So, thank you.
Appreciate it. Julia, I know you have so much going on. We have limited time, so I'd like to basically start things off where we ended up last time. We spent time, as mentioned, talking about sort of a new vision of consciousness. We brought in the themes of precognition and a little bit of the work that you did, sort of studying the physics of retrocausality, and so forth. Let's move forward with where we're going with all this, because obviously what you're studying in the context of time, of the mind, can take us some really fascinating places. So, I'd love to start off handing you the floor. Take us a little bit further from where we ended up in terms of the precognition, in terms of this concept of not just precognition, but of feeling the past, of feeling the future, and where are we gonna go with all of this?
Yeah, I don't know. So that's the first answer, and the second answer is I sort of know. So those two things are always in conflict. But yeah, since I was a kid, I had a fairly good sense of putting things in historical perspective. Sort of things would happen in the world, like during the Cold War, for instance, when I was growing up, and I would notice, oh, now's the time. Now I would think about it differently than those around me. So my experience would be more like, oh, now's the time we have to go through this thing where, the United States and Russia are on tenterhooks, and there's a lack of trust and just all sorts of skullduggery happening, but that'll end, and then what replaces it? So I was always looking at what is the next thing, because this thing has to happen for whatever stupid reason, but what could come out of that? What is the next thing? And the same thing I would always notice with, and this is something, I'm sure this is very common, but I definitely, it's a keen sense, keen is the wrong word. It's a strong experience I have, a big emotional reaction to it when I watch science fiction movies. And so like if you ever see science fiction movies, that were made in the 70s or 80s or something, and their idea of what it would be like now includes some components that are like, wow, like flying cars, cool. And other components where you think, did they really think that we would still have phones that had to be attached with a cord to the wall? Like, right, these things that they were just not able to see. Or the obsession with really cool forms of transportation.
Yep.
So much change has happened in the United States as a result of the automotive. So let's make movies about the future where now we're going to push forms of transportation even further. They'll be shinier and they'll be rounder and they'll fly through the air, or they'll go very fast. but it doesn't occur to people. Maybe transportation itself becomes unnecessary because we have something called the internet. And we do all this work over the internet, right? So like giant pieces that really have massive impacts on humanity are often missed because people think that whatever domain has been showing the most progress lately is going to continue to be the one that is dominant. Instead, what really seems to happen is domains make these lumpy progresses, right? Progress lumps, like, tons of progress in computing and then a stall, right? And now tons more progress in computing. So we start to think, oh, computing, that's going to be the thing that's going to make everything so different. Well, yeah, of course, it's already making things so different, but probably what we're going to notice is something that we didn't expect. And so what would those things be? And I think those two things are, those two shifts that are coming in the next, sooner than we think, probably like in the next 10 years, although it sounds ridiculous to say so. So I'm going to say 20 years, but honestly, I think this is happening sooner than we think it will. I think those two shifts are one, understanding of how to execute on time travel and actually using time travel for practical purposes. And there's all sorts of implications there. If we take the assumption that that happens, then there are a lot of implications there. And the other one is recognition that the only way to move through all of humanity's problems that are happening, including time travel and figuring out how to deal with all the pursuant issues, recognizing that the only way to manage that is to scale unconditional love. So those two things are not two things that are time travel is commonly discussed in science fiction, but not in the sense of like, how would we practically use it on an everyday level? Like, it's this special skill that someone has, or someone gets knocked on the head and there's this one person who has this time travel experience. But what if everyone knows how to do time travel, just like you know how to open your computer and log in somewhere, right? So that kind of scaled time travel and then scaled unconditional love, I think, are the two changes that I see happening, and I see them extremely intertwined. I see them incapable of emerging without the other one. And so seeing that and recognizing that they need each other, and also living through the Cold War and seeing how technology was not ushered into the world very well in terms of nuclear technology that can destroy people and planets. I felt inspired to, that's why I created my nonprofit, the Institute for Love and Time, or TILT, because of this reliance, which I can talk about more if you want. But it has a lot of implications, this idea that if you're gonna have time travel as part of our technological landscape, you're also gonna have a way to scale unconditional love. And that those have major impacts on who we are. So for instance, if you're writing a science fiction movie now about the year, 2100, you'll probably think human conflict is such a necessary part of who we are, that of course the script would have as part of its plot some kind of human conflict, right? These people and those people, or aliens versus humans or whatever, conflict, making things harder than they already are given the natural challenges that exist. We assume that's part of every story that we're going to tell about what humans do. What if that went away? What if that was the obvious thing, like the cord on the telephone from the 1970s, science fiction movie about the year 2020? What if that went away and we were like, oh, of course, didn't occur to us that we were making things harder for ourselves by adding in conflict. But of course, that's the thing that we can subtract out. And still we're going to have to deal with, global climate change and all sorts of other problems. And it's not like things aren't dramatic or fun or interesting or challenging. We just have one less problem. So I think it's kind of like that.
Let's go down both those paths, and let's start with time and time travel for a minute, because on the past show we talked about precognition. So we'll put that in the. And let me take a step back, because you mentioned science fiction. Obviously, in science fiction, everything that ever has to do with time travel has to do with either flying to a black hole or creating some fancy machine to zip you all around. But we discussed other forms of time. I mean, time travel is not just one thing, right? We talked about sort of the precognition, and I want you to go back into that, and time viewing per se. About a year ago, I spent some time with Ron Millett up at University of Connecticut, and here he's talking about time travel, a little different, but once again, not spaceships flying into black holes, but how we could shrink a lot of that down and play with subatomic particles and rotating lasers and things of this nature. A little bit above my scale, but nonetheless, we're reducing this stuff, and we're literally, as you were saying, looking at some of these practical applications. I'm not going back in time today to see my father as a child, but talk about time travel from a perspective of where you think we're going with this, and where obviously there's research probably going on that we don't know about. Fine, but let's talk about the research we do know about, and what you're interested in, and what you're excited about. Take us a little bit on that path.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely research going on that we don't know about, and there's a lot of public projects, like in Russia, in the United States, in China even. And China has actually outlawed discussing time travel as part of stories. They don't want people talking about time travel, which just makes it more intriguing. I mean, like, what could make anyone more interested in time travel in China than that? So that's fascinating. But these public projects make it very clear that physicists, mathematicians, philosophers are working on two kinds of time travel mostly. And those are what I call informational time travel and physical time travel. So informational time travel is the transferring of information over time. And by the reason I put those in quotes is because we still make this mistake when we talk about any kind of travel, where we assume that it has to be travel, and I'm including space travel. So let's go back to space travel just as an analogy for a second. It's like we're the science fiction people who think that we're going to make these cars go really fast, and that'll be the futuristic car.
Right.
But it doesn't occur to us that at some point we're going to realize you don't actually have to travel through space-time to get to another point in space-time. You can jump around it and end up in space-time and start in space-time, but not be in space-time in the middle. And such an obvious point that eventually we're going to get there and be able to do that. And so we'll laugh at this idea. They're like, oh, it goes so much faster. And you're like, that's like a chicken saying, I'm getting to the moon much faster than previously. So anyway, backing up, I lost my place because I was thinking about the chicken and the moon. So informational time travel. So informational time travel is the idea that, so my basic point was, that when I use the word travel, I'm not talking about necessarily going through space-time. What I'm talking about with time travel is the arrival of something, whether it's a mental experience, whether it's information, or whether it's something physical, at a point in time when one would not normally expect it to appear. Okay. So, example of what is not mental time travel. I remember when I was 3. Okay, normally I expect information about the past to have mental experience of that. Sometimes we call it memory. Okay, what would be mental time travel is the example like the remote viewing the future, right? Sure. Receiving information about a fully randomized future event that's verifiable by a third party. Mm-hmm. So that's mental time travel. Informational time travel is not writing a note to myself and then the next day going, oh, look, there's this information here. It was from yesterday. Oh my God, it traveled through time. Like, sure, it's sort of like that, but the time travel element is something has to be in the opposite direction than you would normally expect. But if I wrote a note to myself yesterday and I put it on my table and yesterday morning I woke up and I saw the note and it said, hey, it's from your future self and you should buy stock in Disney or whatever it is. That's informational time travel, right? And it's also physical time travel because the note went with it.
Mm-hmm.
So let me give you a different example that just isolates the information component. Something that's non-physical, well, that's sort of on the borderline of physical and informational is a photon.
Sure.
So a photon is a little bit of energy, so it's physical-ish, but we mostly use it for its information passing capacities. If you could send that back in time so that you could signal back in time, you know, I'm going to flash my flashlight once for buy Disney and twice for sell Disney.
Yep.
Then the day before, if you could see that signal, you know whether to buy or sell Disney, right? So that's informational time travel. Physical time travel, the way I'm parsing this out, would be if you take an object, something physical has mass, let's say, we're going to define something that's physical as having mass, let's say, and you, like a watch, and you put it into some kind of a device like Ron Mallett's cool laser thing.
Yep.
And you see that it, when it returns, it shows up again seconds later or milliseconds later or nanoseconds later. The time has actually passed. So the watch reads an hour later, but it's only been a couple of nanoseconds.
Right.
And you can verify that the watch just didn't have some malfunction. So that would be physical time travel. When people in science fiction talk about time travel, they talk about combining all three of those.
Right.
So taking a human being, a biological creature that has mass through time with their memories, with their mental experience, and being able to process all the information and receive and transmit information, that's sort of the holy grail of time travel. But you could also break it up into those pieces. And informational time travel especially can get you a lot of the things that people think they want from physical time travel. Like the stories of physical time travel, the fantasies of being able to prevent, like Ron Mallett talks about his father dying and,
Right.
and his fantasy of being able to prevent his father from dying. He could enact that fantasy without a human being ever being able to travel in time if he could send information to his father, right? So to me, informational time travel is the first holy grail because it can do a lot of the things. And then we have to figure out, do we want physical time travel? Because in the fantasy world, physical time travel, it's always just one person doing this, right?
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to the real situation, which is a bunch of different countries working on this, a bunch of people going around, slogging around in time, doing all sorts of things. Is that something we want? I mean, especially in a pre-conflict resolved culture like we have in the world right now.
Right.
So where we still believe that human conflicts are a good way to go. Clearly that just extends our own conflictual nature over space-time. Now it's just in the past and the future and in the present. So obviously I don't think that's such a great idea. So I do think that the informational time travel effort is the way to push forward. And that's why, you know, I did those experiments and I think I talked to you about those.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Let's shift over for a moment. We'll come back to time, but I want to go to love for a minute. And I just want to read, Merriam-Webster, it's 3 definitions: strong affection for another arising out of kinship or personal ties, affection based on admiration, benevolence, or common interest, and the naughty definition: attraction based on sexual desire, affection, tenderness felt by lovers. And then there's there's this 4th definition here. Wait, let's see. Love encompasses a range of strong and positive emotional and mental states, from the most sublime virtue or good habit, the deepest interpersonal affection, into the simplest of pleasures. It's got a range of meanings, and obviously, love is different depending on, you know, obviously it's everyone here I have unconditional love for, but I love my wife slightly different than I love my children, that I love my mother. Hey, what's love got to do with it? Start us off on this path, because we're going to do a couple more shows, but take us a little bit into unconditional love and sort of the initial connections, and I'll I'm going to be bringing some stuff in. Obviously, I have a friend down the road here, Sister Elia DeLeo at Villanova, who, in her theories of relational wholeness in the cosmos, love is in a very important part there as well, to holding this universe, this multiverse together. Take us, on the Julia Mossbridge love-time connection, or
The
introduce us to
love
it.
train, the love train. Okay, sounds good. Love and time connection, love and time travel connection. It's unconditional love connection with time and time travel. So I'm agnostic. I don't think so much about romantic love and time, and I don't think so much about platonic love and time, or just affiliation and time. I think about unconditional love and time travel. And the reason is that unconditional love is, the experience of unconditional love is an extremely powerful force. And I don't mean just as a motivational force in human beings. Like it's ironic, but experiencing unconditional love, it sounds like it would make you just say, well, everything's great, so I'm not going to do anything. But it's the opposite. Experiencing unconditional love motivates you to do all the things that are inside of yourself, and bring out, and have the fearlessness that it takes to bring out whatever's inside yourself, which is a net benefit to the world, because what's inside of ourselves, when it gets out, whatever that is, it can find out whether, the world can find out whether that's of value or not, and then act accordingly. So unconditional love is this powerful motivating force, but it's not just a human motivating force. The way I conceive of it, and I think this is similar to Sister Elia, but I'm not sure because I need to talk with her, but is that it's almost like a physical force.
Yep.
Like it's almost like it's not just a feeling. It's like when people feel unconditional love, it's because we've tapped into something. It's like saying, when I see the sun, I have an experience of brightness and warmth on my skin. Unconditional love is something that's out there and is real in itself, and we can access it. And when we access it, it's not like we generate it. It's not like, and then I generated unconditional love, like then I generated a feeling of expectation that, my husband would come home and make dinner or something. It's more like walking into a room that's lit with light and being able to feel that light. So accessing unconditional love, it's like a power source for who we are that we don't acknowledge. And part of why we don't acknowledge it, I think, because I think we all, or many of us, know this implicitly, part of why we don't acknowledge it is unconditional love has, for hundreds of years, I guess, been associated with mysticism and religion and spirituality. And we're supposed to, right now in our culture, we worship science. And so it feels, when I talk to scientists and other academics about this, a little embarrassing to talk about love, because it's supposed to be in this other domain. It's supposed to be in this domain of things, well, we can't really touch with science, and we can't really do the math of love. That's for the ministers and the priests and the rabbis and the imams. And I think that's been a real detriment, because if you want to bring people together in the world that is outside of a particular religion, the only way I know to do it is to understand the science and the math and the philosophy of unconditional love, how it moves in the world, how we can access it, because it is the great transformer. And it feels good too, which is a great benefit, but it also can allow our cultures and our societies to function much better. And so if we can take that, as people become more and more secular, if we can, the secular world and the religious world can together say, there's this great, we have lots of suffering in this world, and there's a great cure, and it's called unconditional love, and this is how you access it. It doesn't have to be the domain of any one group of people. It's just a truth. When you're thirsty, you drink water, and I don't care what religion you're from. You know, when you're thirsty, you got to have some water. It's important. You know, you got to breathe air, and you got to have a connection with unconditional love, because that's going to be where we need to go next.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now, what does that have to do with time? Well, it has a lot to do with changing our conception of time. So we're moving from a culture in which we always saw things coming, you know, and I say our culture because I live in the United States, so that's what I'm referring to, but it's just generally Western thought, this idea of a linear flow of time. And in the scientific world, we were taught to laugh at the idea of teleological thinking, where we would say the embryo is developing in the way that it does during embryogenesis. You know, because it has to be pushed by something in the past, it can't be pulled by something in the future. So we laugh at, I remember being taught neuroscience and neural development during a time when the professor would literally make jokes about people who thought, oh, and it's, you know, it's just so beautiful. It makes you think something's pulling it from the future, but of course it's not, and ha ha ha. And it's all a lot of tension. And I think the tension is that it is so beautiful, it feels like something's pulling from the future. And we're starting to realize that maybe something is pulling from the future. Maybe the future and the past are the boundary conditions that we consult to get the information about what happens in the now. And if that's the case, as we start to shift the culture towards that kind of understanding, if you start changing your mind about time and move from this linear past pushing only way of thinking, and you don't change your mind about love and unconditionally loving yourself and others, regardless of the choices they make and you make, you're stuck. Like that society can easily fall apart. Because one of the factors that's influencing you is this future over which you have no control. So if you go in the direction of, okay, we're not going to adopt unconditional love as a scalable entity, what you're saying is, I'm going to go ahead and judge you for all these things that are being caused potentially from the future that you can't control, right? And so it's a shift to recognize, like, you want to hate someone for being a mass murderer. I get it. They do need to be locked up. I get it. They need to be away from other human beings. We're going to try to reduce suffering, and not loving them is not the answer. So and then what is the answer is unconditional love regardless, because they do not have control over their future any more than you have control over your future, and yet that future is feeding into what is happening to them now. So it's a major shift in thinking. It's a holistic map of the universe. It's as if time is a hologram. Right? When I say time is a hologram, I mean events in time are like a hologram. So a little bit holds the rest. So blaming someone for something that's going on here, when in fact that is related to something that's over here that must also happen, it doesn't make any sense anymore. It's like blaming one piece of the puzzle for being a corner piece, you know? So the only approach that works is unconditional love. When you see that the sort of the fabric of the universe is that complexly interwoven, and that someone's behavior is not only because they're a jerk, you know? They might be a jerk, but like that there are all these different factors that are not in control. So that feels like the relationship, and the relationship goes in the other direction too. When you start getting in touch with and accessing unconditional love for yourself and others, there's a sense of timelessness or fluidity to time, where you're moving backwards and forwards, both mentally and creatively, or something like a flow, like the Mahali Csikszentmihalyi type flow experience happens, where time becomes less of a drag behind you, like behind a boat in the water. Time becomes more slippery. And so I feel like it goes in both directions. And I feel like if we were to scale unconditional love, that would actually help our development of time travel, at least informational time travel, if not physical time travel, just in terms of changing our minds and changing our thinking and making us less resistant to this idea of everything deserves love.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone deserves love. There's no undeservingness that happens. We're all at the mercy of this hologram, you know?
It's interesting, and you brought up embryology before, and I as I'm listening, I had to pull up a couple notes from a previous time, because three of my favorite quotes, and I'll take a little. I know this is your show and you're interviewing.
This is your show, dude.
Well, I want to read these because I think they and we're going to do show 3, 4, and 5, obviously, after this, but. Three quotes that I love, and they all feed back to this principle in embryology. One from the famous German anatomist Erich Blechschmidt, who had a statement that went, no cell can ever be thought of as a static entity, but as a momentary aspect of spatially ordered metabolic movements. Once again, this theme of motion. Dutch embryologist Jaap van der Wal, our children don't come from us, they come through us. And then from the book Embryos, Galaxies, and Sentient Beings by Richard Grossinger, this is my favorite one, basically how the universe makes life. An embryo is nothing more than the universe writing itself upon its own body. And I think coming back to what you're talking about in terms of space-time, this is not just, we're not just this static entity. We are being impacted by the past, but we're also being pulled by the future, and getting back to this theme of flow, of motion. We're not the static thing, and if we can think of ourselves more from the perspective of motion, of movement, I think it fits nicely into sort of this overarching concept that you're working with here of both time and love being instrumental in sort of everything we see in the cosmos. Sorry, I didn't mean to take. I know we have limited time today, but
no, I think that's beautiful. Can I just tell you what that reminds me of before you ask your next
sure,
question?
Sure.
That just reminds me of the concept that I think is really important when visualizing this stuff, which is that unconditional love allows you to hold all of your moments. Have we talked about the necklace analogy before?
Not yet.
Yeah, so it's like, here's a moment in time, an event, here's an event, here's an event, a birth, a death, whatever moments in time you have. These are like beads on the necklace.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And we sort of have this weird culture where we say, someone says, point to yourself, and you go, here I am. You point to your body in the now. But we also know that when I say you, like point to yourself, like you, who you are, that includes all of these moments through time. I mean, if I wasn't the same person I was 2 seconds ago, then the meaning of who I am, the meaning of myself with a capital S, doesn't really exist, because the self is what is continuous through time. It is defined by being in motion through time. And so it's fascinating that we both want to say nothing that we can't, if we can't see it, it doesn't exist anymore. Past doesn't exist anymore. Future doesn't exist yet. But in fact, it absolutely exists in the core definition of who we are.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And that's because of this idea of motion through time. So anyway, thanks for thinking of that.
Yeah, no, those are three of my favorite quotes. So I thought I'd toss them in here. Where do you want to go? We have 20 minutes, and you have a hard stop at 5. Where else do you want to go today? I mean, I have a bunch of stuff on my list here, from robots to acoustics to Post-Material Science Academy. So I have some stuff on psychedelics here.
Where do you want to go? You're the driver.
Let's talk about, let's go into the psychedelics for a minute. All right. Are you all right with that one?
Sure. I'll talk about anything.
Yeah, I think just because, once again, thinking, obviously going back to sort of this mental time travel concept, and how we get there, how we train and how we sort of unlock some of the potential of the precognition possibilities that exist amongst the population on this planet. I think I told you a couple of weeks ago offline about 15 years ago or so now. I had a brief 5-minute discussion with Russell Targ of remote viewing fame, and I asked him, is there any pharmacological interventions that could improve the ability of the mind to view the future and remote viewing and all this stuff? He was like, no. It's a totally different thing. You can't take drugs. You can't do this and that but ultimately, for those that may have this ability and it's nascent or embryonic, we have to train in some fashion. Do you think there are any pharmacologic possibilities connecting in with the sort of neuropharmacology of precognition, or other techniques? Forget psychedelics for a moment. We can talk about that, but meditation.
So like, how would someone train to,
yeah, what's on the list of, not technically how you train, but, what are some of the things on that menu of, we've got to go through X, Y, Z to really, get somebody to sort of the base level of controlling these precognitive events?
All right, I will speak. This is a very, this is a heated question. I will speak according to my experience and the data that I know, but the answers could include things that I'm not speaking to because of either my bias or because of the information that I have.
Sure.
But Russ Targ's response was an extremely informed response. I mean, because he was involved in all the work to try to find pharmacologic agents that could do this.
Yep.
And so that doesn't mean that since then there haven't been other discoveries, but it does mean that wasn't just a casual no. Part of the reason it wasn't a casual no is because really skilled remote viewing requires you have to have your wits about you. Like as you're doing it, you better be sober, because it's a really technical skill. If you're high in any way or altered in any way, you may get good information, but you could get lost to that information and not be able to report it back. Or you may get bad information that feels like good information because you don't have the capacity for discernment to determine whether that information is useful or not. And so actually doing it, I think you have to be sober. In terms of unlocking, if there's a sort of way to unlock that capacity in someone who really wants to do it but doesn't feel like they have the acumen, the first thing, of course, to try is to go to a class and see if you're right about you thinking you don't have the acumen. Because a really good teacher can sometimes get you to recognize, even on the first exercise in class, that you actually might have some acumen there. But second, maybe for some people, psychedelics would help. I would imagine what we're talking about here with this remote viewing stuff is, let's see if I can use my whiteboard. Okay, so we're talking about, all right, there's always this line, right? The line of liminality. And underneath the line, imagine you have information about the world. So in this case, your information is like a triangle, a rectangle, and a swirly thing. Yeah. Okay, that's the information that you're not consciously aware of. And your goal is to try to get that there's a triangle, a rectangle, and a swirly thing. So you're up here. And so you're always going to be up here, because as soon as you get information up into the conscious awareness, it's now in conscious awareness.
Right.
And so your job is to bring these things up and to communicate them to someone else who's also up here in conscious awareness. It's a tricky job because as soon as this triangle passes this level, you want to call it a triangle. And as soon as this passes this level, you want to call it a rectangle. The problem is that what these are representing something else. They're almost 100% of the time, they're not actually a triangle, rectangle, and a spiral.
Okay.
So if you report them the way your conscious mind would like to label everything, triangle, rectangle, and spiral, you failed because someone else is going to think it's actually a triangle, rectangle, and spiral. Turns out this is a frog looking at you. This is the door that the frog hops through. And this is the path in time that the frog took to get there. There's no way that information comes out up here if you go ahead and label all those things.
Okay.
So the trick to remote viewing that makes it something that's more like a martial art is really seeing this not as a triangle, but like, oh, it's got something here and something here, and then it's got this shape, something like this, I don't know what to call it. And it's bounded by this biological membrane. There's something down here and there's something down here. So that's more of what we're talking about, right? That's closer to a frog. I would never call this a frog. I don't know what this is. When you're in that mode, you're just like, there's shapes and there's this, and this is a biological membrane, right?
Right.
You're describing, you're not identifying. It takes a ton of practice to get to where you can do that in a replicable way where it's also verifiable. So that line, being able to just look at that, what's beneath that line without labeling it, that is what you could potentially, I imagine, kickstart. It's like inducing greater transliminality. Transliminality is your capacity to get the information up from that subliminal place. Inducing greater transliminality with various methods. One method is meditation because it focuses on just really accepting what is there and observing rather than bonding to it and deciding you have a name for it. Another method could be psychedelics. And you know, I think psychedelic research is really powerful and important. And I've read Michael Pollan's book and a bunch of other more scholarly works about psychedelics. I think it's very important. I've never done psychedelics because of my family history with mental illness. I think it's dangerous for me. But I encourage other people, if it's safe for them, to see, you know, in a safe environment, and if it's legal for them to do that, because we're going to find out all sorts of ways in which the mind can allow itself to let go of this labeling capacity. But overall, I think what it is whatever you do, you're trying to find a way that allows you to report what's there. It's like you are the instrument.
Right.
You're not the thinker. You're like the binoculars. But we like to layer on top of the binoculars, like, I know what it is. And that's the part that gets in the way of almost every remote viewer, except for some who come from the creative side and tend to be natural psychics anyway. And they can have the opposite problem, which is they get that's a frog and they pull it up and they say it's a frog, and then they tell a whole story about the frog. That isn't true, but it's just like they're creative, and so it's stimulating. So their task is to actually reduce that liminality, to reduce the transliminality, so that they can actually just frankly report, become a reporter, more like a journalist rather than a storyteller. So I oscillate between those two problems in my particular remote viewing practice. And what I've found is that the best thing for everything is water. Which is not really, I mean, that's not a sexy answer, right? The sexy answer is like, try this new cocktail that someone could market and sell for thousands of dollars. But water is great.
Any special type of water?
Yeah, right. Whatever kind you want to sell.
The ones with 2 hydrogens.
Yeah, right. It's got an oxygen and 2 hydrogens. I don't know. My experience is that water is really important, and also that and sleep is really important, and all the things that make you a functional person.
You bring that up, and I see we only got 10 minutes left, but I'm just going to throw this in there. We'll continue it in episode 3. How does lucid dreaming have any connection to a relationship with precognition and or remote viewing? And I know that's a loaded question. Take a time, but sleep, dreaming, lucid dreaming. Say a few things if you would, and we'll get into this on the next episode.
Yeah, I think the connection is in sleep and in dream. Well, certainly in deep sleep, but in dreaming as well. I think the only place that you really access is down there, plus the storytelling capacity in dreaming. So it's like you sense the frog and then you tell the story, just like the psychic does in waking. Yeah. And I think absolutely it has relationship to remote viewing. It's just that remote viewing is sitting down with an intention while you're awake, so you have more control over a discernment over what's going on. And there are people who do essentially remote viewing in their sleep. So like Dale Graff, Graff is famous for his military work, but in remote viewing, but also he turned it into his capacity to do precognitive dreaming of the next day's newspapers. And then he was used recently as a participant in a financial market experiment where he would dream about, you know, an image associated with one or two market movements up or down. And he's extremely good. And so that's the way he does it. So I think a lot of people are searching for, and I'm working with this guy who's a lucid dreamer to see if I can turn him into a precognitive lucid dreamer. He's a lucid on-demand dreamer. I think that his capacity for precognition is pretty high. So I'm working on that, but, or we're working on that, I should say, because he's definitely a partner in that work. I think it kind of doesn't, I think, you know, I'm kind of like, sorry, I don't feel there's a recipe. I feel like people are after a recipe for like, this is the way to best get this information from the future. And I think the answer to that question is whatever works for you.
Got it.
And if you've been recording your scores in some kind of way that you can actually get feedback, right? So that's why I made that website where people can actually get feedback. If you notice over time when you do X, Y, and Z, you get better scores, then that's a scientific-ish way of determining what works for you. But what works for one group of people might not work for another. So for instance, it turns out that unconditional love, your experience of unconditional love, actually could influence your capacity to do this. So in a recent experiment I did where we were hypnotizing people to experience unconditional love, before we started the hypnosis, if you measured how people's sort of level of unconditional love, you just ask them how much unconditional love are you feeling? Here's a definition of unconditional love. The folks who were feeling at the high end of unconditional love were able to do a remote viewing task like this at a rate above chance and significantly better than those who were feeling low levels of unconditional love. So for the people who are feeling high levels of unconditional love, how to make them even better is going to be a different answer from those who are feeling low levels of unconditional love. So the low level of unconditional love people first need to feel higher levels of unconditional love so they can even access that, I believe. And then they can move on. The people who have higher levels of unconditional love probably need to practice not labeling the things that come up and just, you know, using the tools again and again. So once you get people to a point where they have the capacity and they demonstrate the capacity over and over, then it's like finding someone who admits that they can play piano and just saying, now we're going to do piano lessons, you know, so you can get better.
Fascinating subjects. We're headed off to episode 3 next.
Yay.
For everyone listening and watching on the YouTube, once again, you've been spending time with Dr. Julia Mossbridge. Check out her many books, including The Premonition Code, The Science of Precognition, and How Sensing the Future Can Change Your Life, as well as The Transcendent Mind, Rethinking the Science of Consciousness. The Calling, 12-week science-based program to discover, energize, and engage your soul's work. Unfolding, the science of your soul's work. The Garden, an insight experiment. Unfolding the perpetual science of your soul's work. Check out the websites of the Mossbridge Institute, the Institute for Love and Time. Julia, we're doing this again. We're going to keep going. This is going to be a long stream of episodes, but you work in some of the most fascinating areas that the world needs to know about and move forward with. And as we say on our show, you know, thank you for helping to create a better tomorrow. Well, the better tomorrow is going to come through not social media and reality shows, but through the visions and technologies that you're developing for our future. So once again, thank you.
I hope so. I
Thank
hope
you
I can
so
help.
much. We'll see you again
Thanks,
in a week
Ira.
or so.